Let's Talk Supply Chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. Now, before we dive into the show, I'm going to ask you a question. Not using complete rates is one of the top three mistakes shippers make when rate shopping. So, in a study of companies with a mix of carriers who don't return fully loaded rates, by how much do shippers overpay? Well, what do you think? Let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because I'll let you know at the end of the show. Today, I'm joined by a company that helps e-commerce businesses deliver their orders fast, free, and on time. Well, who is it? Well, it's Shipium. Now, Shipium drives costs savings throughout the supply chain that can shift money towards the premium delivery experience that your consumers want. Great transparency, more convenience, and faster speed. And Shipium are the people that can help you turn logistics into a strategic differentiator for growth. And so today I'm joined by Jason Murray, co-founder and CEO. Jason spent 19 years at Amazon before bringing all of his experience across retail, forecasting, and supply chain together to found Shipium. And today we're going to be talking trends. We're going to be taking a closer look at what's changed post-pandemic, what those trend shifts mean for your businesses, your supply chains. We'll be diving into costs and sharing some of the easiest ways to cut spend in a tough market. And we'll be shining a light on agentic AI and how you should be thinking about integrating it into your supply chain. So welcome back, Jason.
Hello, good to be here.
It's been a while since you were on the show last. It was 2022, if you can believe it.
Yeah,
I don't feel like it's been that long, but it's almost been, what, like
yeah,
3 years?
yeah. We were at, I believe it was at a conference too. A lot has obviously changed and settled down since we last talked.
And
It's
I
awesome.
can't wait to dive into that. And I'm really looking forward to catching up. So, can you give us a bit of an introduction to Shipium? Tell us who you are, what you do, get us back up to speed into that. But also talk to us about what's changed for Shipium since we last spoke.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just do the quick origin story. You covered most of it. I was at Amazon for 20 years. My career was largely, technology, logistics, supply chain, the combination of all three of those things. Built out this organization in the 2010 era when Prime was becoming a big deal, and as data science was kind of coming online in the world, right? That to build this kind of data science first supply chain functionality in Amazon, and it covered everything from forecasting to inventory positioning to transportation optimization at the back end. And the synchronization of all that stuff was part of the secret sauce. The other part of it was kind of applying these modern machine learning techniques to that. To We had a lot of data at Amazon, and we were using that to make better decisions. You make better decisions to the stack, you get better outcomes.
Right.
And so, really, Shipium was formed on this idea of trying to democratize or recreate this concept outside of Amazon, right? And left Amazon in 2018, started Shipium, early 2020, late 2019. And really what we're trying to do is basically rebuild this concept, but make it more widely available. If I think about what's changed in the last couple of years since we talked in 22, first and foremost, I think when we really started Shipium, we were really heavily focused on kind of the retail segment, right? And it's kind of what I knew and what the market was kind of, I had connections there. It was a good way to kind of get things going, et cetera. I think what we've seen a lot of in the last couple of years is more of this expansion into more third-party logistics providers and also into these kind of B2B industries like parts distribution, et cetera, parts, medical, pharma, et cetera. And what's been so interesting is just that I think the business models are actually different, right? They have different requirements, different customers, different kind of demands. You know, I think you look at something like pharma, they're much more risk sensitive than they are kind of cost sensitive in a retail sense, right? And so I think what's been interesting is I think even though the business models are different, the application of kind of how we approach problems has worked, right? And so the same way of kind of taking this data first approach to problems is resonating really well with that segment. And I think some things have changed, some things have remained the same. And obviously, when we last talked, we were still kind of in the throes of the pandemic, and that is no longer kind of front and center. Obviously, I think the thing that is just dominating the narrative now is AI, right? And obviously, with us being so data first, it's a very comfortable spot. Right. But even, we've had to kind of rethink how our approach is, because I think to some degree, the new form of AI actually acts as kind of an accelerator for all of the data science and machine learning work that we've done in the past. So
Yeah.
those are the two big trends I see that have changed. And then obviously, you know, I think there still is this kind of post-pandemic, there was kind of this, consumer CPI, what's the state of the consumer? And I think it's been interesting that's kind of just been floating along in this nebulous state. I don't think anyone really feels like it's really bad or really good. And so it's kind of almost become a non-issue despite what we try to talk about.
Yeah,
So
well, and people like
yeah,
buying
yeah,
has changed, right?
yeah,
Consumer buying patterns, I think, have completely changed.
yeah,
And it's interesting what people are spending their money on, right? You mentioned parts, and it made me think about eBay and how there's a
yeah,
lot of people buying products, especially parts and different things like that, because people are spending more time at home on like different projects that they can work on. I also
yeah,
think about adults and Lego because there's like new
yeah,
Legos that have come out specifically for adults because adults are really taking this notion around projects and how do we get
yeah,
creative and how do we either do it through Lego or we do it through cars and parts and building and what does that look like? And I think more people are getting involved with things like that. And so buying has really changed because they're buying different things than they did pre-pandemic and they're buying them in different.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, even early days in Amazon, was this notion of like just how, you were really like entering this age with the internet of the long tail, right? Where it's just this concept was, you think about in the 1990s, you went to a super Walmart was like the largest kind of SKU collection you could
Right.
find. It's maybe a couple 100,000 SKUs, maybe larger than that. I don't mean to misquote, but that's kind of what you could expect. And then you kind of enter this online world where you have millions and millions, if not hundreds of millions of SKUs, right? And I feel like to some degree it took a while for that to actualize and trickle through the system. Like even though there was all of these SKUs, people kind of didn't really know what to do with it, right? And
Right.
and there's a lot of these patterns where even in, kind of the popular culture, that was the concept also, but it took a long time for like, music ended up actually consolidating because everyone's using Google and using the same thing. And I think it's interesting to see whether you get diffusion or kind of, you know, coagulation, right? And I
Mhm.
think but in the e-commerce space, I think the width of what people are buying just continues to go. And it's either like fashion, the Sheins and the Temu of the world that are giving this huge variety, parts and projects and kind of what people are into, that continues to widen,
Mhm.
right? So fascinating.
But I also think the conversation, like social
Yeah,
media and online, have
right,
changed the conversation around retailers because people can come together a lot more if there's a problem. So I
right.
was reading recently about Kroger. I don't know if you've heard about this, but they've had all sorts of delivery issues.
Hmm.
And there has been articles all over the internet about people complaining about their deliveries and having to wait 6 hours for their bread and then their
Yeah.
bread coming in and being squished and things like that. And so when you talk about, the trend being towards AI, and then we talk about how the buying patterns have changed and how the communication and the discussion around retailers has completely like blown up kind of, right?
Mhm.
Because it's reaching everybody. You make a mistake, people know about it, right? And so it's more and more important that you're getting it right and you're using the tools like AI to do it.
Yeah, that's right. I feel like the younger generation is just much more comfortable with it. It's not clear to me that my oldest daughter has been to the grocery store in 2 or 3 years, right? Like once she got the bug of like, I can use Instacart to deliver this, or I can use whatever to deliver this. It's like that, it's kind of over, right? Like I don't, and it's like you kind of spell out the problems that everyone talked about, like, what about fruit being smashed? And she's like, well, I'll take a bruised apple over having to go to the store and deal with all this stuff,
But
right?
it's
So
not even just that, it's
yeah,
all the extra
yeah,
fees. I don't know about you,
yeah.
but when I go to do that and I look at all the extra fees, I'm like, oh, I should just get in the car and
I
drive there.
I know. It's just like the classic, your time is money though. It's like, just but I hear you.
Now, you've talked about how AI is a trend, right? And AI technology really seems to be going so fast. It's kind of overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people in general, but then a lot of professionals within logistics and supply chain, just sort of like, where do I start? What do I do? Is that the only trend that you're kind of seeing so far in 2025, or is there other things that we should be talking about?
Feel like it's really dominating the narrative right now. There are other things going on. I mean, obviously we had kind of tariffs at the beginning of the year.
Hmm.
We haven't personally seen that. It's there. There's been some pressure from it,
Hmm.
but I think kind of and I think what we hear from our customers is mostly they don't like the uncertainty. That's the part that bothers them more than whether you agree with it or not. Just that you kind of put that aside and say it's mostly just that we're having trouble planning, right? But then, of course, again, like not to be just a broken record, but then everyone goes to, well, actually, then it speaks to more of you need this autonomous
Right.
processes, right, that help you deal with that in a much faster fashion, right? So you're kind of
Yeah.
back to, all right, well, if you're, because I do think there is this like meta narrative that the world is kind of, you can't look at it as what's going to be the next thing, right? The next problem. It's more just that there's going to be this constant stream of issues, right? It was the pandemic several years ago, and then it was like clogged ports and whatever. But everyone was kind of like, well, when this is over, we can just go back to having this like really normal thing. And
No.
and I think what you see is it's just because of all of these factors, which are probably somehow driven through some sort of, they're probably related to things that you're talking about, social media and everything else. I don't totally understand it, but the reality is that there's going to be things happening all the time. And if you're going to be competitive, the only way to deal with that, you have to kind of get out of this like human analyst cycle of 6 months to make decisions, right? If you're going to be able
Yeah.
to deal with this as a business realistically, right? And so then you're back to, okay, yeah, it's AI again, right? Which is
Right.
like, that is really the meta story for everything in 2025, in my opinion. I think you look at big macro things, the S&P 500, it's being driven by AI, right? Everything is being pushed through that kind of filter right now.
Well, and all conversations are coming back to it, which I think is
Exactly.
the kind of what you're saying, but also the most important part. So when we think about AI as a trend, then sort of all conversations are leading back to the AI road. What do you think that signals for supply chain? Like, what do you think the industry should be thinking about? And maybe it's not just AI, maybe it's data as well. And how do they sort of take action and think about where can I start with AI? What makes the most sense for me?
Well, I think I'm going to just answer a different question in
Sure.
classic COA parlay, but I think basically, if you kind of start with where do you think this is going, we can debate a bit more about how fast this happens and whatnot. But if I kind of play forward to 2028 and say, what is the world going to look like given the way this technology is moving? I mean, I think the COO, the CSCO, the people that are kind of in charge of this,
Mhm.
you have to really think about their organizations as being this autonomous set of fleet of agents that are making decisions, analyzing, checking, auditing, whatever you want to call it. That's where we're heading, right? And so if you're not kind of skating towards that puck, you're probably not, you know, moving in that
Mhm.
you're not making strategic decisions if you're not moving in that direction.
And everybody
Um,
else, I think the key point, right?
so yeah, I
All
used a
your
Canadian
competitors.
friendly reference there. So it was like kind of a call back to your heritage. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like we from a competition standpoint, you have to be heading in that direction, or you're going to get basically outcompeted. And so I think then you take it back to like what steps need to be taken. I think that interestingly, everybody was the pattern we've seen, and I think this is not very unique to my world, like necessarily this world, but a year ago, everyone was like, AI is going to be huge, right? And so, of course, like boards were yelling at CEOs, those were yelling at CTOs, CTOs were yelling at their teams, and a bunch of stuff got installed, right? And I think there's been this kind of flood of studies that come out recently and kind of said like most of these projects didn't work, there wasn't really much gain from it, et cetera. I think that was kind of phase one, and now we're in the figure out how to make this stuff work. So then you kind of go back to like, okay, if I'm going to help people envision this, right? I'm looking at what's work. Like when I think about my organization, we have recently kind of reorganized around this notion of being kind of AI native from the core, right? So I want everybody in my organization. And the most obvious place to start is development. And I
Yeah.
think if you look at those workflows, it's very apparent where this is all going.
Mhm.
I think, so I used to program back in the 90s, right? And, you're dealing with all these kind of like several gnarly things. There's all these human processes involved that besides the actual coding, it takes hours to put this stuff into the system. You've got to check it, QA it, et cetera. And I watch my developers now, right? And they've got three agents running. Two of them are competing with each other to see who can output the most efficient code. And then something is writing a test on the side, right?
Wow.
And it is absolutely mind blowing, right? And then this is so mind blowing to me that I've actually started doing this on the weekends because it's so cool to see. But the only reason I bring all this up is
Okay.
that basically this framework of like kind of that human, where you're effectively firing off things to go work on, you're firing off what we're calling agents in this world to go work on these problems. I think inevitably this is where it's going, right? And so you have to kind of, as an organization, start moving to this data first approach, right? You've got to, culturally, you have to think about it as we're going to make decisions with data. We're going to lean into the need to have like data as a first class citizen, whether that's kind of changing how you're ingesting or changing how you're thinking about your cost structure. And then starting to make decisions off this, and that's going to ultimately parlay into this future state. So
Well, and I think it's interesting, right? Because I think we also bring in some things like hesitancy, fear, and overwhelm. And I think a
oh
lot of
yeah,
those are some of the barriers that are holding a lot of professionals and leaders back. You talked
yeah,
about how everybody yelled at each other to get it done, and they got it done and it didn't work. And so
yeah,
there's hesitancy from that as well, right? But
yeah,
also,
that's
we've
right.
seen some technologies come and go. And
Yeah,
so there are conversations around, okay, everybody's saying I is here to stay, but what if it doesn't?
yeah. I think you have to make, obviously that's always a possibility. I think for me personally, we've been watching this closely, right? And I think if you're talking about 2020, I think ChatGPT was like early 23, maybe late 22 when it all kind of
Mhm.
started going. The I think if you look back at that, I think it was reasonable for people to be like, I'm going to watch and see where this is going. Because I mean,
Mhm.
if you've been around the industry, we've done the blockchain
Yeah.
run, right? We've done the metaverse thing, right? Everyone in warehouses was going to have goggles, and I mean, even like yeah, exactly. The blockchain was going to account for where these containers are all over the world and solve the stolen purse problem, right? It was that was going to be this transformative technology, and you had speakers talking about it. I think my observation is that this thing hasn't let up, and that's why as you go deeper in this rabbit hole, if you go into it, you're not going to come out with a conclusion that this is not going anywhere, right?
Right.
And that's why I kind of bring up this. We were looking for real use cases to kind of start this flywheel, and I think you start looking at how your developers are using this, and you're like, this is real productivity. This is like, if you're nerding out with me, this is equivalent to moving from assembly to C back in the 80s, right? I mean,
Right.
this is like a massive jump in productivity that we have not seen in a long time. And so if you're going to extrapolate from that, it's going to happen in every industry and everything. And so, but back to your point, there's always going to be cultural pushback. Anytime you take a new approach, it's like the classic, it's going to be better at a bunch of things and probably worse at a couple things. And
Yeah.
and people are concerned. And then I think you also have this like, you always have this problem with automation where organization, like you're not necessarily, your processes and organization don't fit the new technology. And
Right.
this always creates like this. So, I liken it to like, if you've got five people on the team and it's doing 20% of all of them, like 20% of what they do, unless you can kind of think of it as it doesn't completely solve this thing, then people are like, well, I'm going to fall back to what I was doing before. So
Right.
there's always pressure from that. And we went for sure.
Well, and I brings me back to our organizations. Can they move fast enough? And I'm sure
Yeah.
you see this, right? When you're talking to potential clients and you're talking about what you can do for them and how you're using agentic AI and what it means for them, I feel like I just don't know if organizations are moving fast enough. Plus, they have to look at different processes, potentially different tools for different processes, and I wonder if that is also a bit of a barrier to the AI. And can we move fast enough to get to that 2028 that you talked about? I mean,
Yeah.
like you said, we can debate on timing all day, which is fine.
Yeah.
But if this does happen in 2028, where does that leave everybody if we're not making decisions fast enough and we're not moving fast enough? And so, what does that look like in your world? Like when you're talking to potential customers and you're talking about what you can do for them, how are you talking to them about sort of the speed of decision making and how you can help them do that, but also how you can bring agentic AI into how they're working today?
No, that's great. I mean, I think we've always had this, a lot of the messaging that we've had for a while fits. I think it's just kind of on steroids now, right? And I think you take, you know, the kind of notion of if you're making decision, if the computer is able to make decisions, right, then that creates a lot of flexibility. It obviously is going to be able to go to a much more fine-grained level. So you think about humans, we only have enough capacity to do these kind of wide swaths as we organize and kind of structure things, right? And computer, this even pre-AI, is able to go very fine grained. And this is where you saw like that area that you create from being very fine grained, it just totally destroyed the ad industry, right? I mean, that you being able to target that specifically. And so the same thing applies. If you think about kind of the Shipium problem space we're trying to solve, like, thinking about having large, wide grain rules about which carrier to ship from is going to give you a certain amount of benefit. But if you're able to then calculate on a per shipment basis exactly what needs to happen and model the whole thing out, we're going to do better. And if it's 10% better, that's still a huge hit to your bottom line, right?
Mhm.
All of that, I think all of that is to say that people want they want things that are tangible results, right? And I think when you think about kind of moving, like a practical way to move into this future, I think you have to think of it as like incremental wins that provide immediate productivity. And some of it is going to be micro productivity. Like, we're about to release a feature. We'll often get these questions like, okay, I tried to ship this thing. Why did the system make the decision it did? Right.
Mhm.
And it's like, it gets sent, they create a ticket, they send it to it gets sent to an engineer. The engineer looks at, sometimes it's obvious and it's posted on our console, right? But sometimes it gets sent to an engineer. The engineer has to go explore why this thing is thing. He responds back. There's a back and forth discussion, and then go, okay, that makes sense. Or, you have you're some issue with your system, right? So I think we have, one of the first things we're going to release is like a chat bot that lets people explore this dynamically, right? So what happened to my shipment? And this is like seems like a small thing, but if you think about the micro productivity gain from if there's auditors, I mean, if there's if there's analysts in the field trying to figure out what's going on with their network, and they're able to quickly say like, well, what happened with this shipment? Am I comfortable with this? What's going on? That's a huge jump as opposed to opening up a spreadsheet, submitting a ticket, sending out the thing. I mean, all the things that kind of have to happen, right? And so
Yeah.
that's a practical example. But then you think of there's all sorts of other human processes that we think of as like we have all these models and all of this data that have been focused on optimizing the hell out of this stuff. But if you have a way to interact with it that's much more human native, right, that's going to just speed up this whole process, right?
Right. I think we have trust issues. That example that you just shared, all I kept thinking about was we have trust issues in supply chain
Well,
because we're
yeah, I mean,
we're but
yeah,
also what you're talking about is how do we create the trust that is needed? It's not going to
exactly.
happen
Right.
overnight, right? We
Yeah,
have to be able to trust not only the partners and the vendors, the technology providers that we're working with, but we have to trust the data and the information that's coming back. And
right.
part of that is that we, as humans, are also going to have some bias around some of those, how we
Oh, for
feel
sure. Yeah.
about the answer that comes back.
Yeah.
And the human nature is to get an explanation around it because if I don't understand it here and I have to go explain it here,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, for
need to
sure.
be able to have that interaction. But again, it doesn't need to be that manual interaction, tickets,
Exactly.
waiting time, and all that kind of stuff because that doesn't do anybody any good.
Well, I mean, there's all of inspection is a critical part of businesses, right? I mean, I think healthy businesses, there's lots of inspection going on all the time. And one of the results of inspection is like oh, actually, it's fine, or and here's why. One of the results of inspection is yes, there is an error, but it falls within the tolerance of our error rate that we expect for this process, right? All of those things are fine answers, right? I think it's getting to that quickly and automating what was a very intensive human process that I think, frankly, no one really likes doing, right? It's not, no one likes submitting tickets, no one likes looking into this stuff. And when we talk about this specific example, you know, I would say most of the time, we can explain it away, right? I mean, we can say this is why this happened, but it feels weird to that person. And this is a way to kind of create, like you're using the term trust. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
that's totally healthy in an organization. I mean, it definitely at Amazon, that was part of we had a whole concept of, people would send Bezos these emails, right? And he left his inbox open all the way until I left in 2018. And he would basically send what we called these question mark emails to like, why is the customer experiencing this, right?
right.
And I think early days as the company, it was usually like if they sent something in, you were like, well, it was identifying some huge problem. Later days, it became more about, here, let me validate this for you. The system is working as expected. That's falls within the tolerance of our errors for what
Yeah.
this company, what we expect, right?
Well, and I think good questions, there's always room for good questions because that's
Right.
kind of where the innovation comes from. If you're not
Exactly.
getting those
Yeah,
questions back, right, to say, hey, why is this happening? It's not that I don't trust you, but I really need to better understand it or maybe flag it for you because there might be a better way of doing it. I think this really goes hand in hand with how AI is going to move us forward in supply
for
chain.
sure.
If we
Yeah,
can bring good questions to the table and have the partnership with like a company like Shipium and be able to ask these questions and then be able to start building the trust as well.
right.
I mean, I just
Well, you
think
think
that's where
about
the
what these
magic's
things
going to
are
happen.
good at, right? It's like they're very good at distilling information down from lots and lots of sources, right? And
Mhm.
that's a massive part of what you do in supply chain.
Yeah.
There's all of these problems with. I know I have 10 vendors that are required to get it from the manufacturer to someone's house, right?
Mhm.
And I'm trying to figure out what's going on within each of those vendors. I'm trying to basically drive improvements in my overarching process. I
Right.
need some way to get at that information. I need it to be distilled. And traditionally, how we've done that is just manpower,
Mhm.
right? And I think the interesting thing about this is this really opens the door to I can get a higher quality output with with these machines, and then you focus people on more strategic problems, right? Like which is like negotiations or thinking about where we're going next with the business or what needs to happen, so I think that's going to be there's all of this kind of muck that happens in the supply chain, and managing that information flow and being able to take action on it is going to be the magic, right? But
Yeah.
I think if you're optimistic future, I think we're moving towards a world where this is better for everyone, hands down.
Yeah. Do you have a real life example of how you're working with a customer right now with the tools and the AI and all that kind of stuff that you want to share with us?
I think this Q&A thing, which is not really agentic, but is interesting. I think the stuff we're doing now is very much in pilot phase, early days. But one of the ones I like to talk about is the notion of so we had a system at Amazon called F2P, Fulfill to Promise. It
Yeah.
did the order routing. You've heard
Mhm.
of this.
I
Okay. All
have,
right.
yeah.
Well, so
I
yeah,
actually
so
looked into it. So I'll tell
yeah.
you a little bit of story before you keep going. So
Okay.
I had a makeup line for female athletes. It was like a sweat
Okay.
resistant makeup line. And I
Okay.
ended up creating this marketplace for female athletes with a whole bunch of different products, but I didn't want to carry inventory. So I looked at what Amazon was doing, and that's why I know.
I see. Interesting. Yes. This system, though, basically made these decisions about route orders, right? And it was looking at trends like how is inventory building, or draining out of buildings? Obviously, what's the cheapest way to get it? What does the split affect customer promise? There's all these kind of variables, right? And I think we have a product that mimics that, and we kind of call it the 2023 version of this was. basically trying to accomplish that same set of things, right? Well, the other aspect of F2P that was going on in the business was we had this concept of what we called big red button and little red button, right?
Okay.
And basically what this was some sort of exogenous event that occurred where we needed to hit a button, right, to say like, the fulfillment center in Kentucky is on fire, like worst case, or there's the labor dispute or the roads are icy or whatever's going on, right? And we'd hit this button and then it would kind of reroute around the fact that this building needs goods. We need to basically move volume away from that building into other parts of the network.
Mhm.
And you think about like that manpower required to do that was people were watching for things, they were looking on websites, they were tracking the discussions, they were watching kind of trend lines on labor productivity, et cetera, to kind of get to these answers, as well as having these conversations. And you think about like, okay, well, why in today's world, why not have an agent who's monitoring this, right? And I think the power of it or the magic of it is an agent in the new world, we're going to be able to take data flows from so many locations. And unfortunately, what they're calling it, just as a little tidbit, is multimodal data. And I'm like, how can this be more confusing? So we've got containers in the tech world and we have multimodal now. And so you can imagine like the shenanigans that are going to come from
Oh, for
conversations,
sure.
of
Yeah.
bridging these things. But anyway, this concept though of I could start pulling from all these different sources, right? And then agentically go out and say, we need to do something is going on with this building, please reroute, right? This is a project that we're kind of working on in pilot phase right now. That's an example of how we use some of this new technology to basically take a bunch of workload off of the existing, people, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you for sharing that because it really puts it into context. Now,
Right.
one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning was that we were going to talk about costs. And I think it's important for us to talk about because supply chain costs are rising, right? We're talking about investment in technology, which we use the word investment, but it's still a cost to the business. How are you talking to your customers around, costs rising, investment in a technology like agentic AI or Shipium, and what that's going to do for their business and their bottom line, and how to really think about it? Because I think this is important too, right? Because this is another barrier of that conversation that you're having.
Yeah. No, I think this kind of goes back to the whole we're back to trust issues, right?
Yeah.
But I think part of the challenge with these processes and being in sales, going through a sales process is people are, if you're the COO at this company or a VP of transportation or whatever, right? And you're getting pitched by vendors all the time and they're all saying, I'm going to save you 50%, I'm going to save you
Right.
30%, I'm going to save you. And so they're just getting hammered with this, right? And so kind of back to the point of like, how do you get how do you basically prove that your product is actually going to do what it's going to say? And the reason I talk about it in the framework of trust is because I think our installations, you think about it from a pure balance sheet perspective. If you can pay us X amount of dollars to save 10X amount of dollars, you're going to do that all day long, right? And I
Right.
think for the most part, that's the simple answer of how would people think about this financially, right? If
Mhm.
you can save a bunch of money, you're going to do it. Then you come back to like the practical aspect of it is, do people trust that result, right? And this is where you get kind of back into, I think the stuff that we're excited about is, kind of the time to set up our system, because it's kind of this, we're taking in all of your rate cards, we're modeling very precisely every little detail that happens during any shipment. And so then we can, once that's all, we understand your cutoff times, we understand your, with the building's hours of operations, the like assumptions about like labor and volume, all this gets modeled in our system. And we have this, the digital twin concept where we have this model of how we believe the transportation network's going to run, how your buildings run, what's the cost structure you're going to incur. And that lets us do some powerful things. But where I'm saying this is that takes a long time to set up, right? And so this is
Mhm.
another example of if you can quickly ingest people's data and then kind of play back, this is what's going to actually happen, given that I have this, speeds up that process significantly,
Hmm.
right? And this is an example of like how these technology and these tools are going to be able to kind of prove this to people much quicker,
Yeah.
because I'm going to be able to take all of this. You think about, I've got, you know, a half a year of time to go through this process of ingesting all this stuff and entering it. Like that's a big time. People are impatient, right? We
Yes.
want our groceries in an hour.
And our
We're not gonna
ROI
wait
back
six.
sooner than
Yeah,
that.
it's sooner, right? So you can't have this like long cycle of weeks, months, et cetera, where people are ingesting stuff. And this is a perfect example though, where we can, even if it's like 90%, right? Even if we're getting 90% of the network modeling done quickly, this allows us to then play out, this is how this is going to run and actually save you money. And so then it's back to kind of the original point, just like taking it back. They want to be able to inspect it and get some clarity and create trust there. And I personally think we're in a good position to obviously handle that. But the point is that you have to go through the cycle, right? And that's going to be the secret, is really bringing the data into the system, proving it to them, and then obviously it's a partnership, and we're going to be able to help them in both ways.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we do need to wind this down. So, I got one question for you because I love to leave the audience with one thing from this conversation that you think people should be thinking about, taking action on, walking away from this discussion with. What's the one thing that you'd like them to take away from this?
I would just say that, I'm actually a believer that a lot of people are underhyping AI right now. Despite us being in the middle of a hype cycle, we are in the belief that we're underhyping it. And what I mean by that is that if you go back to my statement on 2028, this is happening, right? And I think, first of all, like the main thing to take away is you have to start playing with this stuff immediately, or you're going to get left behind. And I'm saying this in kind of a fear mongering type of way, but whatever small, whatever small improve, like start to feed this into your organization and push your organization, or doing it personally. Play with these tools, play with Gemini, play with whatever your company is using to run the stuff, because like what I I'm actually having every one of my direct reports now. I want them to install and run and try a new tool every month, right? And some of it won't work, but you have to feel what it's like to
Mm,
actually run this thing, try it, do it. And if you're sitting on your hands, you're not going to discover that. And I think you have to start to see it if you have any chance of kind of keeping up with it. And I do not think it will be a straight line journey, right?
mm,
But I am 100% convinced that this is coming. And if you resistance is not going to be the way to get there, right? Like pretending like it's not happening is not going to be the way there. You have to try to start piloting stuff, trying stuff, playing with stuff, right?
mm.
Actually get to that point. So
Yeah. And if you don't have your data in order by now, in the back half of 2025,
it might help you
run,
get your data in order. We're seeing
run,
that, right? It's very good at categorization. So maybe, like the kid that waited till I used to always wait till the last minute to do my projects in school because,
right?
then hopefully the project's changed and you don't get screwed. So this is great. Like if you're a procrastinator, you don't have your data ready, you might have paid off. So
Yeah, so get it done now. And
yeah.
also give your teams the opportunity to play around with the tools that are out
Exactly.
there.
Thank you for summarizing it. This is put some mandates in around using and trying this thing, because you have to start moving in this direction.
Yeah, and move away from hesitation, fear,
Right.
overwhelm. If we give people the space to be able to do that without thinking
Right.
they're going to lose their jobs,
Right.
you're going to get so much more out of it and you're going to be so much more ahead of the game. So, did you want to
Totally.
guess at today's big question? At the top of the show, I asked you, in a study of companies with a mix of carriers who don't return fully loaded rates, by how much do shippers overpay? Well, it's an average of 6%. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but for an enterprise spending $10 million on parcel shipping annually, that's a $600,000 loss, but an easy cost to cut as well. So, if you want to modernize your supply chain and turn it into a strategic value driver for the future, head over to shipium.com to learn more. And remember to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Check out more content from the best and brightest over on letstalksupplychain.com. A massive thanks to Jason for joining me today and to the team at Shipium for making this episode happen. Jason, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Love
So,
talking to you all the time.
yeah, until next time, I'm Sarah Barnes
Thank
Humphrey,
you.
and this is Let's Talk Supply Chain.